story happened like 10 years ago. I grew up in a smallish house. For the majority of my childhood, I shared a bedroom with my older brother, 2 twin beds on opposite sides of the room, 2 dressers and 2 closets. We didn't even have enough room for a desk. It wasn't cramped, but it wasn't exactly comfortable either. So when my brother went away to college, I immediately moved his bed out of the room and commandeered the space, so to speak. With his permission, of course. I was finally at the age where a bedroom desk was a necessity, so it was nice not having to do homework in the basement or upstairs in my dad's office. That arrangement worked seamlessly for the 2 years before I myself went off to college, at which point I wasn't living at home anymore, so it didn't matter. After graduating, my brother got a city job in our hometown area, so we ended up moving back into my parents' house. And the first thing he does? You guessed it, re-sees our bedroom that I had spent months of expended effort redesigning. I was a little irritated at first, but my parents contextualized it by saying I had basically done the same thing to him, so it was only fair. I couldn't argue with that, so I just accepted it. By the time I graduated, I had also found a city job, so I opted to move back into my parents' house, just like my brother had. Unfortunately, I didn't have a room anymore, so I'd have to make other arrangements. The only other unused room in the house was our upstairs guest bedroom, so even though it was half the size of my old room, it would have to do the trick. The guest room was right next to my dad's office, which was the only other room on that floor. It was also directly above the garage, which meant every time someone clicked the garage door button, the whole floor would vibrate for the full 10 seconds it took the door to open. The room kind of overhangs the house slightly since it's on the corner, so there were 2 windows on intersecting walls, one overlooking the driveway and one overlooking one of the sides of the house. It wasn't ideal, but it was private and quiet most of the time. This particular incident happened on a Friday evening when I was home alone. My brother was in Baltimore for some work-related conference, and my parents were spending the night at our family shore house like they did most summer weekends. I was coming off an absolutely grueling day at work, so I decided not to go out with any of my friends or even leave the house. I just wanted to order some food and call it an early night. It was around 11:30, and I was lying in bed reading a book, trying to unwind from the day. The house was completely quiet, which was kind of nice since it's usually pretty chaotic when everyone's home. That's when I heard the unmistakable sound of the garage door starting to rise, followed by that all too familiar vibrating of the floor that I'd gotten used to over the past few months. It took a few seconds for it to really hit me. None of my family members should have been home. My parents had specifically said that they were staying at the shore house until Sunday night, and my brother wasn't supposed to be back until Saturday afternoon. It took several seconds for that realization to fully sink in, but when it did, my heart started racing. I immediately jumped out of bed and looked out the window toward the driveway, but it was too dark to make out anything clearly. I could see that the garage door was open, but I couldn't tell if there was a car inside or who might have opened it. Without another thought, I rummaged through the closet until I found one of the baseball bats my parents had thrown in there from my younger days. As I was quietly walking down the stairs, I tried convincing myself that there was a logical explanation for the garage door opening. Maybe my parents had forgotten something and driven back. Maybe my brother's plans changed. Hell, maybe the door had glitched and opened on its own. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, right before turning the corner toward the main part of the house, I could hear faint voices. The voices were definitely coming from the other side of the house, where all the bedrooms were. They were too quiet for me to make out what they were saying, but I could tell that there were at least 2 people talking. That's when I knew for certain that someone had broken into our house. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, whispering my address and telling the operator that my house was currently being burglarized. I left the call live and put the phone back in my pocket like they tell you to. The operator told me to stay put and not to announce my presence, but I felt this overwhelming urge to defend my house. It was like I was being compelled by some invisible force to do something rather than just hide and wait. So against the operator's instruction, I decided that's exactly what I was going to do. I crept down the hallway toward the voices, clutching the baseball bat as tightly as I could. As I got closer to my parents' bedroom, I could hear the sounds of drawers being opened and things being moved around. They were clearly searching for something valuable. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to do was probably stupid, but unable to stop myself. I started yelling as loudly as I could to catch them off guard, then charged into the room with the baseball bat raised above my head. There were two men rummaging through my mother's closet, and they both yelled out in shock when I burst through the door. I could tell they hadn't expected anyone to be home, let alone someone willing to fight back. That gave me confidence, despite the fact that I was outnumbered and they could have easily had weapons of their own. I swung the bat at the closer of the two men, connecting with his leg. He cursed and hobbled a few steps before falling over. I turned to the other one, but before I could get a clean swing at him, he dropped his shoulder and tackled me before I could react. The two of us hit the ground hard, and I immediately realized that this guy was significantly larger and stronger than me. He wrestled the bat out of my hands without much effort, then got his hands around my throat and started choking me. I was fighting for my life, clawing at his hands and trying to get him off of me, when I saw the first guy crawling towards us. He had something in his hand that looked like a knife, and in that moment, I realized I'd made a grave mistake by trying to play hero, a mistake that was going to cost me my life. I genuinely thought those might be the final moments of my life. I started accepting that I was going to die in my parents' bedroom, and all I could think about was how devastated my mom would be when she found out. But then, in the background, I heard the faint sound of police sirens approaching. The last thing I remember is the second guy picking up my baseball bat and swinging it at my head. Everything went black after that. When I woke up, someone was shaking me gently. I opened my eyes to see a police officer kneeling beside me, asking if I was okay. I was dazed and confused, and it took me several seconds to remember what had happened. I looked around the room and saw that the door connecting my parents' bedroom to the backyard was wide open. The intruders had clearly knocked me out and fled through the back when they heard the sirens. The officer told me to stay put and not to move too much in case I was concussed or had other injuries. I had a raging headache, but I was conscious and coherent, which seemed like a good sign. Once the paramedics confirmed that I was okay, I refused to go to the hospital despite their recommendations. I gave the officers a detailed account of what happened. They told me they were currently searching the neighborhood for suspects, but by the time they'd arrived, the men were already long gone. After the police finished their investigation and took some photos of the scene, I called my parents and brother to let them know what had happened. My parents yelled at me pretty harshly for being stupid enough to confront those guys, and I deserved it. Had I just done the smart thing and hid, there's a good chance the police would have been able to apprehend the perps. The men were never found, despite the police canvassing the neighborhood and following up on a few leads. My parents installed a comprehensive security system the moment they got back from the shore house, complete with cameras, motion sensors, lights, the whole nine. The days after the break-in, something kept bothering me about the whole situation. All the doors to my house were locked that night, and the only way to open the garage door was through a little button in my car that my dad had programmed to be a wireless switch. There was no way anyone would just stumble upon it. Whoever had broken in that night had known me or my family well enough to know where that button was. Up until that moment, I never locked my car when it was in the driveway either, so that's something the culprits would have had to know as well. Even more concerning was the timing. They somehow knew that my parents would be away for the weekend, that my brother was out of town. I don't live in that house anymore, but my parents were never able to determine who had broken in. It was actually something that made my dad really paranoid for a long time, since he too thought that whoever had broken in was close to the family in some way. I'm not going to go as far as to say that night changed me forever or anything cliche like that, but I will say one thing. Life before and after you've accepted you're going to die are two very different things. I can still remember that feeling of thinking it was the end for me. It just felt so dissociating. Nothing can replicate that feeling. This happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still shaken up by how calculated and personal the whole thing was. I had recently moved back to my hometown to help care for my aging mother, who lives about 20 minutes away from me. I found this small duplex that was perfect for my situation, close enough to get to her quickly if needed, but far enough that I still had my own space and independence. My mom has been having some health issues lately. Nothing life-threatening, but she's had a few minor falls around the house, and she's stubborn about accepting help. I'd been trying to convince her to get one of those medical alert systems, but she insists she doesn't need one and that I'm just being overprotective. It's been a constant source of stress for me, especially knowing that she's alone most of the time. On this particular evening, I was just settling in for the night. It was around 9 p.m., and I was on the couch watching TV when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number that I didn't recognize, but since I was still relatively new to the area, I figured it might be important and answered. The woman on the other end identified herself as a nurse at a local emergency room. She said my mother had been brought in about an hour ago after taking a fall and hitting her head. According to her, my mom was conscious but asking for me, and they wanted to know if I could get to the hospital quickly. I was horrified. This was exactly the kind of call I'd been dreading since moving back. I didn't doubt the legitimacy of the call for 1 second. The woman on the other end knew my mother's full name, her address, and even mentioned her recent hip replacement surgery from a few months ago. I immediately stopped what I was doing, trying to keep calm and level myself by saying a silent prayer. I didn't even think about locking up the house. I just grabbed my keys, pulled the front door shut behind me, and raced to my car. The drive to the hospital was a nightmare. I kept running through scenarios in my head, and only a few of them were remotely good. When I got to the ER, I rushed up to the reception desk and told them I was there for my mother. I gave them her name and said I'd received a call about her fall. The nurse looked confused and checked her computer, then told me there was no record of anyone by that name being admitted or treated that evening. I insisted there had to be some mistake, since I had just gotten a call from someone claiming to be a nurse there. The receptionist was sympathetic but firm. They had no record of my mother being brought in, and they suggested I try calling her directly to make sure she was okay. So that's what I did. I stepped outside and called my mom's landline, and she answered. She said she'd been sleeping and wanted to know why I was calling so late. I didn't want to scare her, so I just said I was checking up on her and told her to go back to bed. And that's when the heart-sinking realization hit me. This had been a setup. Someone had deliberately given me false information to get me out of my house. I jumped back in my car, furious that I'd been tricked so easily. When I pulled into my driveway, the front door was still closed just like I'd left it. For a moment, I thought maybe I was being paranoid and nothing had happened, but the moment I stepped inside, I knew I'd been robbed. The house had been completely ransacked. My TV was gone, along with my laptop and small jewelry collection I kept in my bedroom. But as I looked around more carefully, I realized the thieves had taken some really strange things too. Family photos had been removed from their frames. Not the frames themselves, just the actual photos. My prescription bottles from the bathroom medicine cabinet had been emptied and taken. It was insane. They had taken things that had relatively little monetary value, yet huge sentimental value to me. It was sadistic, I'm telling you. There's no reason a thief would ever take family photos. There just isn't. I called the police immediately, but I was already feeling defeated at that point. Deep down, I knew the thieves were long gone, and there was nothing I could do about it. I told the police everything. I remembered the phone call verbatim, and after hearing it, the police reached the same conclusion I had. Whoever had been on the other end had known things about my mother and I that no stranger could possibly know. For the life of me, I couldn't even come up with a list of people who would have that information, or even ways that someone could have gotten that information in the first place. The officers told me to feel free to call back whenever I had something concrete. Then they left. I was utterly baffled. Just imagine how unsettled you'd feel if some stranger knew enough about you to lure you out of your house. The theft itself was bad enough, but the fact that they targeted family photos and medical information suggested it wasn't just about quick cash. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something longer term, possibly identity theft or some other scheme that required personal documentation. But over the next few weeks, nothing else happened. Even though my mother, quote, can't remember who she might have talked to about her personal info, I'm pretty confident that she's the source of the leak. She surprisingly has a lot of friends for a woman her age, and knowing her, she probably said too much to the wrong person. I've warned my mother about that very thing, and she's finally agreed to be more careful about who she gives personal information to, but I can't shake the feeling that we're still being watched by someone who knows way too much about our lives, and isn't finished with whatever they're planning. Either way, I recently got a Ring camera, so hopefully that's enough of a deterrent. If anything else happens, I'll send an update. I'm a single guy in my early 30s, and I've been living alone in this rented house for over a year now. It's a nice little place in a quiet neighborhood, Nothing fancy, but it's comfortable and the rent is reasonable. I've gotten into a good routine here and really feel like I'd made it my home. The incident happened on a Thursday night around 11:30. I was getting ready for bed when I heard aggressive pounding on my front door. Not knocking, but actual pounding, like someone was trying to break it down. I looked out the window, but couldn't see much because of how poorly the porch light is positioned. Despite not being able to see who it was and the aggressiveness of the knocking, I'm a pretty buff guy, so I wasn't scared or anything, more so irritated and confused. I opened the front door, careful to keep the screen door shut as an added layer of protection. I'm not sure what I was expecting to see, but what I did see was surprising to say the least. There was this extremely agitated man standing there. He looked to be maybe a few years older than me. He was average height, had disheveled hair, and was wearing clothes that looked like they had been slept in multiple nights in a row. But what really caught my attention was how angry and unstable he seemed. His eyes were darting around, and he was breathing heavily like he'd been running or was having some kind of panic attack. He was also pacing around, like he couldn't keep his feet on the ground. Before I could even ask what he wanted, he started yelling that this was his house and demanding that I let him in. He said I was trespassing and that he was going to call the police if I didn't get out immediately. I thought he was either on drugs or having some kind of mental health crisis, or maybe a combination of the two. I tried to calm him down and explain that he had the wrong house, but he became even more agitated. That's when he started rattling off details about the house that made me freeze up. I don't even remember everything he said, but he knew several things about the house that you couldn't observe from outside it, details that only someone who had actually lived there would know. Like, for example, he knew that the door for the master bedroom is poorly designed and bangs into the toilet. He knew that the back door sticks and you have to lift it slightly while turning the doorknob. There was some other stuff too, but I really can't remember it all. I don't think I even said anything while he was talking. I was just standing there in shock. But that was only the beginning. It was about to get much, much weirder. Through the screen door, he pulled out a folder and started showing me documentation. He had what appeared to be a lease agreement with his name on it, dated from about 6 months before I'd moved in. He had pieces of mail addressed to him at this address. Everything looked official, though I suspected it had been forged somehow. But the most unsettling part was when he pulled out his phone and started showing me photos. They were literal pictures of him inside my house, sitting on my current couch watching TV, cooking in the kitchen, even lying down in what was now my bedroom. The photos looked recent and completely legitimate. They weren't obviously photoshopped or staged, and most of them weren't solo. They had other people in them, all of whom I'd never seen before. He showed me one photo that he claimed was from this past 4th of July, just a few months ago. It was a selfie taken by a woman I didn't recognize. In it, the woman, him, and a few other people were facing the camera and smiling at the kitchen table. There was a box of fireworks off to the side, and the detail and context of the picture made it look completely authentic. That's when I genuinely started questioning my own memory and sanity. How could this person have all this evidence if they never lived here? I started wondering if I somehow blocked out memories of sharing the house with someone, and if I was the one having some kind of psychological breakdown. It was freaky, especially since I knew for a fact that I had been home on the 4th of July, so the pictures made even less sense. The whole situation was so surreal that I told them I was going to call the police to sort everything out. Not even in an antagonistic way, I just didn't know what else to do. I figured they could check the records and determine what was going on. But the moment I mentioned calling the cops, the guy's demeanor changed completely. He suddenly became very calm and said he'd wait outside while I made the call. Then he just walked away from the door and disappeared into the darkness. I watched from the window, but I couldn't see where he went. When the police arrived about 10 minutes later, I explained the whole bizarre situation. They told me I should try reaching out to my landlord to get in contact with the previous tenants, and that I might get some answers that way. I had all the required documentation proving I was renting this house, but when I offered to show it to them, they waved it off. They said whoever had been on my doorstep was probably just going through a mental episode, and as long as they were gone, I should just carry on with my life. Then they left. I wasn't just going to sit there and be satisfied with that, though. Whether or not that guy had left still left the question of how in the world he had all that evidence. With my landlord's help, I was eventually able to get in contact with the previous tenants. I should mention that my landlord had no idea what had happened either, and said he didn't know anyone matching that guy's description and had never rented to anyone like that. But anyway, the old tenants also had no idea who I was talking about. They said they'd never lived with anyone matching his description, and they'd lived in the house alone for 3 years before moving out. They were just as confused as I was about how this stranger could have such detailed knowledge of the house and apparently legitimate photos of himself inside of it. For the next 2 weeks, I was constantly on edge, but nothing happened, and I started to think that maybe it had just been some elaborate scam that had failed. But of course, that turned out to be mostly wishful thinking. One night, I came home from a night on the town with my friends to find my house completely ransacked. It wasn't like a typical burglary where someone grabs obvious valuables and runs. The place was completely turned upside down, like someone had been looking for something specific. What that thing was, I had no idea. The craziest part is that most of my electronics and other valuable items were still there, despite the fact that the rooms they were in were completely trashed. The police found no signs of forced entry, which suggested that whoever did it had a copy of my key. Given the timing and connection to the strange incident 2 weeks earlier, it seemed obvious that the same person was responsible. The police took things more seriously after that, and so did my landlord. He replaced all the locks in the house immediately and free of charge, and also installed additional security measures. The going theory, and the one I believe, is that some crazy person really does believe he lives in my house and broke in to look for his personal belongings or something. And okay, sure, that's problematic enough on its own, but that does absolutely nothing to explain how he had all that documentation, let alone literal copies of my house key. I wish I had the sense to take a closer look at that so-called lease agreement he had shown me, because I might have been able to get his name. But in the moment, I just wasn't thinking clearly. The documents don't even bother me that much. All that stuff could have been easily forged or altered, including the alleged pieces of mail. What freaks me out to my core, though, are the pictures. I have no explanation for any of that stuff. It's possible they're really old pictures whose dates are doctored, but even if that's the case, it still doesn't explain how my landlord, who's owned that house his entire life, didn't recognize him. One of my friends suggested that I'm up against something not fully natural. I don't believe in that kind of stuff, but I will say that I've had this constant creepy feeling hanging over me whenever I'm in my own home, which is most of the time. I can't even begin to rationalize the whole thing. I just hope that's the end of it.